where in our open and welcoming community we live our message of hope, love, justice, and joy. We extend a special welcome to our visitors this morning. We're very happy that you're here. And we invite you to stop by our newcomer table after the service if you haven't already, so that we can get you any information that you'd like about our congregation. Our next Exploring Unitarian Universalism program, which is our brief introduction to our faith and congregation, is today, right after worship. We'd love to see you there. It's from about 11:45 until 12:45 or so, and you can just drop in. You didn't have to sign up or anything. But if today doesn't work for you, we have one of these every month, so keep an eye on the newsletter for our event in April. Also, we are so grateful to everyone who participated in our auction. We're still kind of wrapping that up, our fellowship auction, which is a fundraiser for the congregation. We'll have final numbers next week or the week after that for you. But if you need updates on your bids, or if you need to pay for any of your bids or anything, there's an auction fellowship table right out there in Robinson Lounge where you can take care of all of that. Thank you so much to all of our volunteers who made that a wonderful success again this year. We also are announcing that our Intrepid Spring Sale Planning Committee has set 2 sale dates for this year, Friday, May 5th and Saturday, May 6th. We need lots of donations and tons of volunteers to make this sale a success. So stop by the Spring Sale table in Robinson Lounge after the service for information and to sign up. And also forms for pre-ordering plants and flowers are now available. You'll get a 10% discount if you place the order before Sunday, April 9th. The spring sale happens right around Mother's Day. It all kind of ties together very nicely. And the spring sale, all the money that we raise for spring sale goes out of the doors as outreach to local groups doing good work. So it's a great fundraiser for many different groups. Also, the Women's Alliance cordially invites you to their Thursday, March 16th virtual lunch and program, featuring UU Princeton board member and prevention and health promotion specialist, Mark Rubenstein. Dr. Mark, as I know him, Dr. Rubenstein will hold an interactive seminar, Social Connection for Health, about the latest research on social connection and why it is just as, if not more important, than the more commonly discussed exercise and nutrition. He will explore how to make small positive changes in this area and wrap up with a Q&A on this topic so that everyone can learn from one another. Lunch and socializing begins online at noon and the program starts at 1. You can see Friday's eHappening email for the Zoom link. I'm also pleased to let you know that we do have a worship associate this morning. He didn't make the order of service, but it's the one and only Drake Bear. So thank you so much, Drake. And I'm pleased to invite Cindy and Elizabeth up to the front with an announcement about our annual giving campaign.
Morning, everyone. We are excited to share a quick update on this year's pledge drive, the theme of which, as you should know, is participation. And since we had so much fun with our quiz last week, we're going to have another quiz today. Short. No teams. We won't break into teams. We're just going to have you shout out the answers. Alas, because we don't have teams, we won't have winning teams, but UU Princeton is a winner every time a pledge is made.
All right, so question 1, how many pledges for our fiscal year this year have been submitted as of Thursday afternoon? So
for next year. For
next year, yes. What's the number? 50, 100, 150? Oh, I wish. 61, but that's 61.
But that actually, yeah, that's only 4 days in. So the 100 might be correct.
Yeah, that's exactly so. Yeah.
Okay, second question. How many of these were new pledges?
5. We are 5, 17.
The answer is 6.
So we have 6 new pledges who have not pledged before. And we also, that is wonderful. So thank you for that. So out of the repeat pledges, meaning people who had pledged previously, how many of those included an increase from last year? 60? About 27, which is half. So half is included an increase. So thank you for that.
And when would we like the rest of the pledges to be submitted?
When? Actually.
Correct answer. We would love to have almost all of the pledges in by next Sunday. Now, there's two reasons for this. One we talked about last week, which is that all of the work that goes into soliciting pledges could be actually expended on living our mission, not just raising money. And the second reason is, I don't even think we talked about this last week, but we should have, is that the sooner we know how much money we raise, the sooner we know what the budget can be next year, and we can start planning for it.
Exactly, because we always say, at the annual meeting in June is when we present and we approve and vote on the budget. And the sooner the executive team and the board have our numbers in, the sooner they can actually put that budget together. And the last question, which I will not, basically is, how does one pledge? And instead of you calling out, there's five ways, all very convenient. One is send in the pledge card that you received in the mail about a week ago. Two, there's also a pledge card, and there's a box in Robinson Island by the order of service. You can fill one and drop one in there. You could go to uuprinceton.org and submit one online. Email a pledge to Sarah, or you could even call Sarah if you prefer to just pick up the horn and give her a call. That would be fine too. So, but thank you so much to all of you who have already pledged and those that will be pledging soon. Like, we really value your participation and look forward to finishing the drive soon and having a wonderful budget to go into next year. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cindy and Elizabeth, and thank you to everyone who's pledged and gotten us off to such a great start. And now, friends, on this holy day, let us gather in peace and unity, as one before the grace and grandeur of life, as children before its great and loving mystery. In this hour, may we know anew the holy joy of human lives growing together, so that this hour will imbue all those to come with that same sacred awareness. Come, let us worship together.
Don't bother the earth spirit who lives here. She is working on a story. It is the oldest story in the world, and it is delicate, changing. If she sees you watching, she will invite you in for coffee, give you warm bread, and you will be obligated to stay and listen. But this is no ordinary story. You will have to endure earthquakes, lightning, the deaths of all you love, the most blinding beauty. It's a story so compelling, you may never want to leave. This is how she traps you. See that stone finger over there? That is the only one who ever escaped.
So let us join together in the spirit of prayer. For the fresh morning air and another day of light and love, for friends and family who embrace us in laughter and care, for the food that brings us delight, for the animals who bring us joy, for stories that make us wonder, for puzzles that we can solve together, for songs that are best sung by many, and the work that takes all of us, and the play that invites each of us, and the night that awaits us, that peaceful darkness of dreams and rest. For these and for all the gifts of life, we say to earth, to air, to fire, to water, to spirit, to one another, thank you. And here in the silence, we offer these, the prayers and meditations of our hearts. May it be so, and amen.
Our opening words were by Joe Harjo, Muskogee Creek. In late 2019, I found myself holding hands in a prayer circle of aunts, uncles, and cousins at my Aunt Mim's and Uncle Tony's ranch-style home in central Kansas. Uncle Howard asked the Lord to bless this informal family reunion, which was the first in recent memory not to be prompted by a wedding or a funeral. He asked the Lord to bless each of us in turn and gave thanks for bringing us together and for nourishing us in body and spirit with the brunch we were about to share. Uncle Tony is the only one of us not to have left the Mennonite fold. My sister and I were the only other people in the room who were not Pentecostal or fundamentalist. I viscerally felt a current of peace move through the circle, and my spirit swelled with a longing to complete what felt like a circuit of love and faith, unbroken by my relatives, ancestors, and the tightly knit Mennonite culture that bred me. Somehow, during brunch, I provoked a turn in the conversation toward the political, which led to a rant by my cousin Darren from Texas about illegal immigrants, about how millions of them are guaranteed a minimum annual income by the federal government, even though they don't work, and we taxpayers have to foot the bill. I responded dismissively, "Is that what they tell you on Fox News?" Everyone else was silent as Darren and I argued for 5 minutes until Aunt Mim said, "You should watch Fox News if you want to hear the truth." There was pain and anger in her voice. Bless the heart of Uncle Tony, peacemaking Mennonite that he is, for saying, "Drake, I have something I want to show you out in the barn." He led me way out back to show me the vintage car he'd restored, which led to a private tour of the barn. I burst out sobbing at one point. Uncle Tony's warmth, empathy, and deep decency were very present. I shared with him how the spiritual energy felt to me in that prayer circle, how it made me remember the peace and oneness with eternity I had often felt as a teenager when I'd come out from the East Coast to help with the harvest. I asked him if he thought what I'd felt was just my imagination or if he'd felt something similar. He gently explained that he had. We call that energy the Holy Spirit, and we believe it is always with us when we pray together. There was no judgment or true believer absolutism in his simple answer to my question. Tony made it easy for me to describe why I couldn't feel that same easy peace any longer, because of a need for religious skepticism that felt just as intrinsic to my being as my queerness. 2 hours later, Darren hiked out to the barn, his clean shoes now muddy, and announced, "Mim wants to know what you two have been up to all this time." We'd been talking about how Tony felt as a rare Trump opponent in his town, about how I'd felt as a queer activist during the AIDS crisis and afterwards, about our shared values that I'd described to him as radically communitarian, and he described as normal small town Kansas. I felt incredibly close to him. We'd made a point of not talking about how Tony pioneered the puppy mill industry in central Kansas in the mid-60s, or how we continue to own a large and very problematic operation. I didn't mention the notorious expose of puppy farms on Dateline ABC, which nearly gutted him 20 years before, or that it was produced by one of my closest friends. Later that day, our group visited the site of my grandparents' small farm, originally sharecropped and eventually purchased by them, their modest house long since bulldozed by subsequent owners. Aunt Mim mentioned that one of my cousins, who wasn't there, had refused to include photos of the farm at her mother's funeral because her mother's friends didn't know she had grown up poor, and she would have been embarrassed. Mim said she was flabbergasted by this because she felt so proud of the little farm. As she spoke, I understood. I felt gratitude for the experience of driving the combine all day long during harvest, of driving the ancient wheat truck we called Old Charlie down the highway to the elevator when I was 14 and 15 years old, or the feel of the sun on my skin, the incredible pleasure of relieving my thirst with a simple glass of water. None of us led a land acknowledgement that weekend. Though I mentioned the 19th century Native American massacre that had occurred less than a mile away from the farm at a bend in the old Santa Fe Trail. Pardon my metaphor, but harvesting the grain of these relationships 3 years ago was no harder than harvesting the wheat had been decades earlier. That was really hard. Old Charlie had bald tires and no brakes. The only way to slow down was to triple clutch and pray the transmission would downshift. The only way to stop was to get it in first gear and pop the clutch. On the highway, I literally prayed continuously that I wouldn't die if I had to jump out. The sun on my skin was 106 degrees one August during a heat wave, and with no sunscreen and no cab on the old combine, I worked through what I realized in retrospect was sunstroke. But I wouldn't trade those 2 summers for an easier time any more than I trade Aunt Mim, Cousin Darren, and the rest of the relatives I awkwardly meet where they live on the other side of the cultural and political divide.
In one of the stories, Sky Woman lives on an island in the clouds, falls through a hole in the clouds, and begins slowly descending down to the waters below. The animals see her drifting through the sky and wish to keep her from sinking in the water. So they create would one day only orally and passed down from generation from tribe to tribe, changing with each and would be considered a constellation of tribes sharing a sense of language and location were generally in what is now upstate New York. The Sky Woman stories that are most likely to we're most likely to come across today are often rooted in this tradition, although she is very present in myths of other tribes and nations as well. She is often connected to the creation of the earth as an expression of something beneath a pre-existing sky world. The creation is of a form previously unknown and often involves animals, water, and mud, and then eventually people. This pattern would be replicated around the world in various myths that speak of earth coming from water and animals in the water eventually breathing air and people coming forth from that sacred evolving abundance. The organization of light and dark, sometimes as day and night, is often a part of this as well. Siblings usually soon pop up, and that's typically when the trouble starts. Cain and Abel in a different tradition being a good example of this. Sky Woman has a daughter who is Earth Woman, who has 2 sons who are twins. And while I sometimes get tripped up on remembering who was good and who was bad between Cain and Abel, many tellings of this myth name one son simply the good twin and the other the evil twin, which makes it really easy to remember who's who. So to recap, Sky Woman is from the heavens, and Earth Woman, her daughter, is born on Earth. And her children, Sky Woman's grandchildren, are the good twin and the bad twin. Some versions have the twins arguing in the womb about how they should be born. And as the good twin is typically born in a typical manner, sadly, the bad twin decides to rush his birth as well. And in most of the stories, this causes the death of Earth Woman. Grief-stricken, Sky Woman buries her daughter on Earth and raises her grandsons with a strong preference for the good twin. The twins continue fighting and disagreeing, and their contests for power create morals and myths anew. In them, in this tradition and so many others, we see sibling rivalry as the ancient mythic precursor of the deadly divisions that we know so well today. The ancient storytellers were likely to describe our distance from or distrust of the stranger as an expression of this older and more familial dynamic. They remind us that what we learn in the home has the strongest impact on how we act in the world, either in embracing those experiences or in rejecting them. These stories usually set our divisions in the context of our original unity, in this case with the twins coming from the same mom and yet still never learning to live together in happiness. While the way human life starts changes in myths, the original source of unity really rarely does. And so the myths about literal siblings and twins become lessons for the rest of us today, who are supposed to see everyone as a twin or a sibling. Their tragedies are told not simply to explain our divisions, but to teach us to do better, to remember that we come from one body, one that is not our own, but one that graced and gifted us with life in one another. In the story, from the body of their mother, Earth Woman, buried by their grandmother, Sky Woman, comes 3 plants: squash, corn, and beans. Each is said to grow from a different part of her body. The corn comes from her heart and grows tall and strong. The squash, which grows from her head, grows large leaves that keep the soil moist and protects the plants as they sprout. And the beans, which grow from her limbs, weave through the squash leaves and climb the corn stalks to weave all 3 together. One is strength, one is nourishment, and one is connection, named and imagined in the tradition as the 3 sisters. Grown together in spirit, each honors the mother by caring for and strengthening one another. Grown together in the earth, cultivated by indigenous planters, made each other's harvest more abundant and fed more people and made life more sustainable. The methods of growing these crops together to create more food for more people would be copied by outsiders, stealing the land, and causing greater atrocities upon the native peoples over the centuries and continuing today. It would fuel the rise of a nation that would seek to eradicate the people whose wisdom and strength made life more abundant. It's a cruelty known in history that lives on today in continued oppression and inequality inflicted upon the lives and nations of indigenous peoples. It's a reminder of how far we've all come from our original mother and how far back we have to travel to live in a sense not of false uniformity, but of honest, diverse unity, one in which we know each other's stories and enjoy each other's differences and treasure our common human lives and common cosmic breath. The 3 sisters teach us that cooperation leads to abundance, that when we work together in one another's interests, all are strengthened. They could do otherwise. They could compete for resources. They could try to strangle each other's roots or block one another out from the sun. They could try to hoard the water and dry out the others. They could be the twins. But instead, in this ancient myth and in known farming practices then and now, they each enhance one another's lives and produce harvests greater than any could alone. They live as the modern German forester Peter Wollobon believes forests of trees do, within a diverse interconnected web where life builds more capacity for life. Through networks of roots and the reaching of leaves and the one Gaia-like source of life flowing through the forest, which is greater than all of its parts, the trees and other plants help one another survive and mature. Wollobon has been criticized for anthropomorphizing trees and plants and attributing human emotions and a kind of decision-making consciousness to them. He can defend his science, but it's difficult to spend some serious time in a forest and not come away with the sense that all the life of those trees and plants, it's all building it together. They touch, they move, the same rain and sun feeds them. The ground is covered with the leaves of all of them, and the soil covers their intertwined roots that we'll never see. It doesn't have to be conscious for it to be real and majestic and instructive. And if trees, by chance, can live in each other's interests, just think of all that we, with intention, could accomplish. The indigenous planters knew that in cultivating the 3 sisters together, they could experience a greater harvest, perhaps even abundance. They knew that each had different strengths and that weaving them together would bring each one's gifts into clearer relief. Living in this interconnected way allowed them then and everyone today to expect a better tomorrow, one with more sustenance for more people, so that there would be less competition and contempt. This expectation of a better tomorrow can be what fuels the positive engagement with today. It's what can get us up and moving and outside with our hands in the dirt, digging and planting and nourishing what we expect to feed those we love tomorrow. This expectation is a kind of hope, not an inert hope in which we just imagine something magically coming into being, but an active one in which we foretell a harvest tomorrow as we work to make it happen today. If we expect the worst, if we succumb to despair, if we opt for the ease of nihilism, life becomes the small, anxious trudge that we've imagined it to be. But if we put effort into our expectations of joy and sustenance, connectedness, life too will reflect all of those gifts in greater measure. I've been thinking of this lately because the report that our kids are oppressed. By our kids, I mean liberal-minded kids, more so than conservative. Girls overall more than boys, although liberal boys are more depressed in the study than liberal teens are increasingly anxious and depressed, and that carries all sorts. Some blame social media. Some blame the election of former President Trump and the national tone and climate he cultivated. That certainly didn't help. But this trend of elevating teen depression started before he was even a candidate, when President Obama was still in office. And remember that what was reported was measured before that. So again, I'm sure the divisiveness of 45, but things were already bad and getting worse along these lines before office. Others explain this rise by attributing it to various social realities and changes. There are lots of ideas, at least among those who strike me as wise. I can only imagine many things going into this slow rolling tragedy. But when I look at the world that we on the liberal side of religion, particularly in the realm of social justice, portray, I keep hearing how awful and hopeless things are. And I'm speaking broadly beyond our faith, more at a larger shared progressive cultural level. The messaging that we give is typically of impending doom and disaster. And then when youth and teens do something to combat that, we praise them as giving us the kind of hope that we should be cultivating in them. We have that backwards. We certainly should praise and encourage our kids to do great and thoughtful, compassionate, and just things, but we shouldn't lean on them for the hope that we are supposed to give them. They're supposed to be kids, passionate, curious, committed, and very certain. And we're supposed to encourage that, to support it and smile upon it, and yes, be proud of it. But it's not supposed to answer our us should not be on their shoulders. They should be standing on ours. If we, again, I'm speaking broadly, want to be that foundation, a big part of that involves articulating reasons to be hopeful and to hold expectations that collective efforts to address wrongs have worked in the past and will work again. If our emphasis is always on the doom that awaits, we can expect more and more of our kids to live lives expecting that doom, and of course they'll be depressed. Just as we live the lives before us, so do they live our lives. And if ours holds or expresses no expectation of positive engagement and change, why should they expect any different? We have to look less to them for inspiration, and we have to look more at ourselves and how we are framing what they can envision of their futures. What are we telling them that they can experience tomorrow? What beyond a devastation that they didn't cause but must nonetheless save us from is our vision for their future? How can we help them move on with hope, expecting a good and abundant life of friendship and sustenance and maybe love, and if they want them, kids? We must certainly be real and honest about what is about them. But if we're absent hope and belief, if we're absent actions that they can see and model that creates positive change, and if we're absent stories about people and movements of successful progress, we're not giving them the tools and examples with which they can live happier and healthier lives. We're giving them information with no meaning, anxiety with no response, overwhelming problems, and relying on them to figure it out. I can remember distinctly being a kid and watching the movie The Day After on network TV. I was far too young to watch that movie when I did. It was a horrifying movie about a nuclear holocaust, and I probably shouldn't have watched it, but my childhood was one in which me and my siblings spent a decent amount of time just sort of supervising ourselves. Mostly that was a good thing for me, but sometimes it meant I watched TV I really had no business watching. The movie convinced me that death by nuclear destruction was going to happen any minute now. It was terrifying. I remember curling up with my dog, a boxer named Abigail, and having a very unrestful night's sleep. And I remember soon after, maybe even the next day in school, in health class, being instructed to be sure that I ate enough fruits and veggies and not enough sweets. And I remember thinking, I'm going to eat all the sweets I want because there's going to be a nuclear war soon. And if I live, it'll be like those destroyed people in the movie. So every day is Twinkie Day. Gratefully, that wore off. Having watched the movie with my siblings, I think I just saw how they rebounded and moved on and went to football practice and hung out with their friends and listened to records while sneaking smokes in their bedrooms when my parents weren't home. My parents talked with me about everything too, but mostly that message of doom wasn't really reinforced enough to take root in my daily awareness. It impacted me, but not nearly as deeply as it would have had that best message been proclaimed to me every day in multiple ways, especially in the expansive media and social options that we have today. And so our hope has to be as constant and true as those messages and mediums, not the inert kind of hope, or the kind that only imagines sunshine and Twinkies, but the kind that names the progress of the past, knowing that more is possible. The kind of hope that doesn't look to a barren field and tells the kids to roll up their sleeves, but rolls up our sleeves and digs in and invites the kids to help plant. And then when the harvest comes, doesn't frame that as lacking anything, just celebrates it and moves on to prepare for the next one. It's to be the three sisters in that story, given to the world by the wisdom of the Iroquois, to sink ourselves in soil and reach as one for the sun and rise leaning on one another for support, to be linked, to be one, to be reaching, to know that a harvest is coming if we stay together, if we grow in life as one, if we stay rooted in the storms and share water when it's dry, and if we shelter the new buds growing among us, if we nourish them and edge them toward the light, they'll grow happy and free, unburdened by our worries, but secure in our love and empowered by their connections with others through time. They'll know themselves as siblings who can feed and nourish and create a harvest, not as twins at odds with each other. They'll know that they can expect a bright and abundant future because we'll have shared with them that very vision, and we'll have built it in thought, word, and deed with them together. For the message of our faith is not that the world is ending, it's that the world is beginning, always beginning anew, and together with our lives connected, we can make those ever beginnings always and always more beautiful. May it be so, and amen. And at the end of our hour, we extinguish our chalice, knowing that its light carries us until we gather again. Go forth grateful for the moments before you, the breath within you, the people among you, and the Spirit guiding you toward lives of love and kindness. And go forth knowing that you are held always and always with everyone else by that great love of no beginning and never ending. Go in peace, and amen.